Hey everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the English Hour. I'm Sophia, your host. And today, we've got an exciting topic to discuss. We're going to dive into the power of reading in language learning. Reading is such a huge part of improving your language skills, and we're going to explore how it can help you grow your vocabulary, understanding, and overall fluency. To help with today's discussion, I have a special guest with me, Jacob. Jacob, how's it going?
Hey Sophia, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to talk about reading and how it can make a real difference when learning English.
Absolutely. So, Jacob, why do you think reading is so important when it comes to learning English? What are the benefits you've noticed from reading in English?
Well, for me, reading has really helped me understand how words are used in context. It's one thing to memorize vocabulary, but seeing words in sentences, paragraphs, and stories really helps me get a deeper understanding. It also expands your vocabulary and helps with grammar.
I totally agree. You can learn so much just from the context of a story or article. What kinds of things do you like to read in English? Any specific genres or types of content that have helped you the most?
I'm a big fan of fiction, especially novels and short stories. They're really engaging, and I find that they keep me coming back for more. But I also like to read blogs and articles online about topics that interest me, like technology and travel. I think mixing both fiction and nonfiction gives me a nice balance of learning.
That's such a great approach. It's important to enjoy what you're reading, and when you read things that interest you, it doesn't feel like work. You're more likely to keep going. For anyone listening who's looking to improve their reading skills, what tips would you give, Jacob? How can they make the most of reading as a language learning tool?
Well, first, I'd say don't worry if you don't understand everything. That's totally normal. Just keep reading and try to figure things out from the context. Don't be afraid to look up new words, make a note of them, and try to use them in your own sentences later. Also, try to read regularly, even if it's just for a few minutes a day. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel.
That's great advice. I love the idea of using new words in your own sentences. It's a great way to really internalize them and make them part of your vocabulary. Do you ever challenge yourself by reading material that's a bit more difficult than your current level?
Definitely, I think it's important to challenge yourself, but not to the point where it becomes overwhelming. For example, if I'm reading a novel and I encounter some tricky words, I'll look them up, but I won't stop reading just because I don't know every single word. Pushing yourself to read more advanced material is a great way to improve.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about pushing those boundaries while also keeping it enjoyable. Do you have any favorite books or resources that you would recommend for English learners?
One book I always recommend is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. It's engaging, easy to read, and has a lot of great vocabulary for learners. As for resources, websites like BBC Learning English and apps like Duolingo are also great for supplementing your reading practice.
Oh, Harry Potter is definitely a classic. It's great for learners because the language is relatively simple, but the story is so captivating that you want to keep reading. Thanks for the great recommendations, Jacob. Let's switch gears a bit. How do you feel about audiobooks? Do you think listening and reading at the same time can help learners improve faster?
That's a great question. I absolutely think that audiobooks can be a huge help. When you listen to the story while reading, it reinforces the words you're seeing and helps with pronunciation. It also helps with listening skills, which is just as important as reading. So, yeah, combining the two is a really effective way to improve overall.
I couldn't agree more. Audiobooks can really enhance comprehension, and it's a great way to practice listening to native speakers as well. Plus, you can listen to them on the go. Before we finish today's episode, do you have any final tips for listeners on how to make reading a daily habit?
Sure. My tip would be to set small, achievable goals. You don't have to read a whole book in one sitting. Maybe start with a chapter a day or a short article. As you get used to it, you can gradually increase the amount. The key is consistency.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights, Jacob. And to everyone listening, remember that reading is a powerful tool for improving your English. Don't worry about being perfect. Just keep reading and learning. We'll see you in the next episode. Awesome. Let's keep going then. Jacob, I'd love to dive a little deeper into the idea of building a reading habit. You mentioned setting small goals, which I think is really practical. But sometimes it's hard to stay motivated, especially if you're feeling like your reading is progressing slower than you'd like. How do you keep yourself motivated to keep reading regularly?
That's a great question, Sophia. Honestly, motivation can be tricky. Sometimes it's easy to get discouraged if I don't see improvement right away. But I try to remind myself that language learning is a long-term journey. It's all about consistency, not instant results. What really helps me stay motivated is tracking my progress. Whether it's keeping a reading log or just noting down new words I've learned, it makes me feel like I'm moving forward, even on days when it feels slow.
I love that idea of tracking progress. It's such a good way to see how far you've come, even if the changes are subtle at first. Plus, it can be really encouraging to look back at all the new words or phrases you've picked up. Do you use any specific tools or apps for tracking your reading and progress?
Yes, I actually use an app called Goodreads. It's great for keeping track of books you've read, books you want to read, and it also lets you set reading goals. You can see how many books you've finished over the year, which really helps me stay on track. Also, I use an app called Anki to make flashcards of new words I come across while reading. It's a great way to reinforce what I've learned.
Those are both fantastic tools. I've heard a lot of people recommend Goodreads for staying on top of their reading goals. And Anki is a great app for vocabulary building. Flashcards can be a really efficient way to review and reinforce new words. One thing I've noticed is that a lot of English learners struggle with staying consistent when they feel like they're not seeing immediate progress. Do you have any tips for dealing with moments of frustration or feeling like you're not making enough progress, especially with something as gradual as reading?
Oh, absolutely. It's totally normal to feel frustrated, but I've learned to embrace those moments rather than fight them. I remind myself that language learning isn't a race, it's a marathon. One thing that helps me is taking breaks. If I'm feeling stuck, I'll take a few days off from reading and come back with fresh energy. And sometimes I'll try reading something easier for a bit, just to build my confidence again. The key is to keep going even if it feels slow.
That's such a healthy mindset to have. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that we should be improving quickly, but sometimes slowing down and taking breaks can actually help us stay motivated and avoid burnout. And trying something easier once in a while can definitely boost your confidence. On the topic of reading materials, do you think it's important to read things outside of just books and articles, like social media, news, or even things like song lyrics? How do those kinds of materials help with language learning?
Yes, definitely. I think reading across different mediums is super important. Social media is a great way to see how language is used informally, and it's a good way to practice casual conversation skills. News articles and blogs help you learn more formal writing styles and expand your vocabulary on a wide range of topics. Even song lyrics are great because they introduce you to different kinds of expressions and slang. I try to balance all these different forms of reading so that I get a well-rounded experience.
That's such a great point. Exposure to different types of writing really helps you understand how the language works in various contexts. Plus, it makes learning feel less repetitive and keeps things fresh. For learners who are looking to read more casually, do you have any recommendations for easier, fun reading material? Something that doesn't feel too overwhelming, but still helps improve language skills.
Definitely, comics and graphic novels are a fun and easy way to start. They're often written with simpler language, and the illustrations really help you understand the context. Another great option is reading children's books. Don't be fooled by the children. label, they can be surprisingly rich in vocabulary and often have very clear, simple sentences.
Oh, I love that. Comics are such a fun way to engage with reading, and children's books are a great starting point for beginners. They help with building confidence without feeling too difficult. One last question for you, Jacob. Do you think it's better to read a lot of shorter texts, or to focus on reading one long book in a given time? What do you think is more effective for language learning?
Honestly, I think it depends on the learner's preferences. If you enjoy diving deep into a single story, then focusing on a longer book is great because you'll really get to understand the vocabulary and themes. But if you prefer variety or if you're short on time, reading a lot of shorter texts is just as effective. The key is to stay consistent with whatever method feels most natural for you.
That's really good advice. There's no one size fits all approach. Just keep reading, whether it's long books or short texts. As long as you're enjoying it and staying engaged. Well, that wraps up today's episode for now. Jacob, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on reading and language learning. And to everyone listening, remember that the best way to improve your language skills is to keep reading, whether it's books, articles, social media, or even comics. Stay curious, keep practicing, and enjoy the process. Awesome. Let's keep the conversation going. Jacob, we've been talking a lot about reading, but what about listening? How do you incorporate listening practice into your language learning? Do you have any tips for getting the most out of listening exercises?
Oh, definitely. Listening is just as important as reading when it comes to improving your language skills. For me, I try to listen to content that I enjoy, like podcasts, YouTube videos, or even movies in English. That way, it feels like less of a chore. One tip I've found helpful is to listen to something a few times first to get the general idea, and then again to catch the smaller details, like pronunciation or expressions.
That's such a good point. Listening multiple times really helps you catch things that you might miss the first time around. And enjoying the content makes the process so much more engaging. What do you think about listening to content with subtitles or transcripts?
Oh, I think that's a great idea. Using subtitles can be really helpful when you're starting out. It allows you to connect the spoken words with their written form, which can help with both listening and reading comprehension. As you get more advanced, you can try to listen without subtitles to challenge yourself, but I always recommend keeping them handy as a backup.
I completely agree. Subtitles are a great safety net when you're learning, but eventually, we want to build the ability to understand without them. I know some learners also like to listen to the same content in different speeds, starting slow and then gradually increasing the speed as they get more comfortable. Have you ever tried that?
Absolutely, listening at different speeds is a great way to build up your skills. When you start with slower speeds, you can focus more on understanding the words clearly. Then, as you get more confident, you can gradually speed up the audio to mimic real-life conversations, which are often much faster. It's definitely a good way to challenge yourself while still staying on track.
It's so true. Slowly increasing the speed can be a game changer, especially for learners who feel like real-life conversations are overwhelming. Plus, it helps you get used to the natural rhythm of the language. Now, let's talk about speaking. A lot of learners struggle with speaking because they're afraid of making mistakes. How do you approach speaking practice?
I totally get that. Speaking can be intimidating, especially when you're worried about making mistakes. But I try to remind myself that mistakes are part of the learning process. When I'm practicing speaking, I focus more on getting my message across than on being perfect. I also like to record myself speaking and then listen back to see where I can improve. That's a great way to notice things like pronunciation or grammar mistakes.
That's such a smart strategy. Listening to your own recordings can really highlight areas that need improvement, and it's a great way to track progress. Also, focusing on communication instead of perfection is so important. We don't have to be perfect to get our ideas across. Have you ever tried practicing speaking with a language partner or using language exchange apps. I know some learners find it really helpful to practice with others in real time.
Yes, I've used language exchange apps before, and they can be really effective. It's great because you get to practice speaking with native speakers or other learners who are at a similar level. It also makes the whole experience feel more natural. I try to find a balance between speaking with others and practicing on my own. But I definitely think real life conversations are key.
That's fantastic. Language exchange apps can be such a valuable tool. It's great that they connect learners from all around the world and give us the opportunity to practice speaking with native speakers. It definitely adds a real world element to learning that can't be replaced. Now that we've talked about reading, listening, and speaking, let's move on to writing. What's your approach to improving your writing skills?
For writing, I try to write regularly. It doesn't have to be long pieces sometimes. I'll just write short journal entries or a few sentences about my day. The key is to make it a habit. And like with reading, I try to look for new vocabulary or phrases I can use. I also ask native speakers or language partners to correct my writing. Feedback helps me see where I can improve and teaches me things I might not have noticed before.
Writing every day, even if it's just a little bit, is such an effective way to improve. And asking for feedback is huge. Getting input from others, especially native speakers, can really elevate your writing. I've also heard that keeping a vocabulary notebook for new words you want to incorporate into your writing is a good idea. Have you ever tried that?
Yes, I actually do that. I keep a small notebook where I jot down new words or expressions I want to remember. I also like to make sure I use those words in my writing, which helps me internalize them. It's a great way to actively engage with the new vocabulary and make sure it sticks.
That's an awesome habit. Keeping a vocabulary notebook is such a helpful way to stay organized and intentional with your learning. It's like creating your own personal word bank to draw from. We've covered a lot today, Jacob. It seems like consistency, balance, and a willingness to make mistakes are key themes in language learning. I hope this conversation has been helpful to everyone listening. Awesome, let's keep going, Jacob. We've touched on reading, writing, listening, and speaking. But what about pronunciation? Many learners struggle with pronunciation, especially when it comes to sounds that don't exist in their native language. How do you approach improving your pronunciation?
That's a great point. Pronunciation can definitely be tricky, but I've found that listening and repeating is super helpful. I try to mimic native speakers as closely as possible, focusing on things like intonation, stress, and rhythm. I also watch videos where people teach pronunciation, especially for tricky sounds, and practice those sounds until I feel comfortable. Recording myself and comparing it to native speakers is a really useful tool for me.
Mimicking native speakers is a fantastic technique. It helps you pick up on the nuances of the language that can be hard to learn otherwise. I've also heard that practicing minimal pairs like words that sound similar but have different meanings can help a lot with tuning your pronunciation. Have you tried that?
Yes, minimal pairs are great for practicing specific sounds. For example, in English, there's a big difference between the sounds in words like ship and if you focus on those small differences, it can really help with your overall pronunciation. There are some excellent exercises out there where you listen to pairs of words and try to distinguish the sounds. It's definitely a useful practice for learners.
I love that. Those subtle sound differences are what make language so interesting. But they can also be challenging. I think practicing with a focus on those details can make a huge difference. Have you ever used any apps or tools specifically for pronunciation practice?
Yes, I've used apps like Forvo to listen to how native speakers pronounce words. It's a great resource because you can hear different speakers from various regions saying the same word, which helps with understanding accents and regional variations. There are also apps that help with individual sounds, like Elsa Speak, which gives you feedback on your pronunciation.
That's such a smart approach. Forvo is such a helpful resource, especially since it provides multiple pronunciations of the same word. Speak is also a fantastic app for real-time feedback. I think using tools like these can really speed up progress with pronunciation. Do you also practice pronunciation while engaging with other skills? For example, while reading out loud or during speaking practice?
Definitely. When I read out loud, I make a conscious effort to focus on my pronunciation, even if I'm reading something familiar. It's a great way to integrate pronunciation practice into your daily routine without having to set aside extra time for it. And while speaking with others, I pay close attention to how they pronounce words too. If I don't understand something, I ask them to repeat it, which helps me hear the correct pronunciation.
That's such a great way to practice. It's like multitasking. By integrating pronunciation practice into your everyday language use, you don't have to create extra time for it. Plus, speaking with others and asking for clarification is a natural way to keep improving. Let's talk about mistakes for a minute. As you mentioned earlier, making mistakes is a big part of the learning process. But I know it can still be tough for learners to embrace. What advice would you give to someone who is afraid of making mistakes while learning a new language?
I totally understand the fear of making mistakes, but I always remind myself that mistakes are actually an opportunity to learn. Every time I make one, it's a chance to improve. I think it's important to create a supportive learning environment where mistakes aren't seen as failures, but as stepping stones toward improvement. I also find that when I don't worry too much about mistakes, I feel more confident in speaking and experimenting with the language.
That's such an important perspective. Mistakes aren't failures, they're just part of the journey. The more we embrace them, the more we can grow and improve. Language learning is a process, and there's no need to be perfect right away. I think celebrating small wins is just as important as recognizing mistakes. So, Jacob, what do you think is the most rewarding part of learning a new language? Is it the confidence that comes with speaking, the ability to understand more content, or something else?
For me, the most rewarding part is definitely the ability to connect with people in a new way. When I can have a conversation in another language, it feels like I've unlocked a new level of communication. It's not just about understanding the language, it's about understanding the culture, the people, and the world from a different perspective. That's what keeps me motivated to keep learning.
That's such a beautiful way to look at it. Language truly is a bridge that connects us with others and helps us see the world in new ways. Every time we learn something new, we're building that bridge a little bit more. It's such a rewarding journey. Jacob, I've really enjoyed this conversation today. I think we've covered a lot of great tips that can help everyone listening make real progress in their language learning journey. Awesome, let's keep the conversation going. Jacob, we've talked a lot about the technical aspects of learning English reading, writing, speaking, and pronunciation, but what about motivation? What keeps you going on those days when language learning feels a little tougher?
Great question. For me, motivation comes from remembering why I started learning in the first place. Whether it's the desire to travel, meet new people, or understand more media in its original form, I always keep those big goals in mind. But I also think celebrating small victories is important, like finally being able to have a conversation or reading a book without needing to look up every word. Those little wins keep me motivated, and they remind me that all the effort is worth it.
That's so true. It's easy to get caught up in the bigger picture, but those small milestones are the ones that show how much progress you're really making. It's like running a marathon. You don't focus on the finish line the whole time. You enjoy the steps along the way. Do you have any strategies for staying motivated when you feel like you're hitting a plateau?
Definitely, I try to change up my routine to keep things interesting. I might switch from studying grammar to listening to a podcast in English, or from reading a textbook to watching a movie in the language. Variety helps prevent burnout and keeps things fun. I also set mini goals for myself, like learning 10 new words a day or finishing a chapter in a book. Breaking the process down into smaller tasks makes it feel more manageable and less overwhelming.
That's such a smart approach. Mixing things up helps keep your learning experience fresh, and setting mini goals gives you something tangible to aim for. I think a lot of learners can get stuck when they feel like the journey is too long or too difficult. But breaking it down into steps makes the process feel much more achievable. How do you celebrate those mini goals when you reach them?
I love that question. When I reach a mini goal, I like to treat myself. Maybe I'll watch an episode of my favorite show or take a break and relax. It's important to acknowledge the hard work you put in and reward yourself for reaching a milestone. It's a great way to stay positive and remind yourself that you're making progress, even if it feels slow sometimes.
Rewarding yourself is such a good way to stay motivated. It's like giving yourself a little celebration for all the hard work you've put in. Plus, it helps you associate learning with something positive rather than something you have to do. Now, you mentioned podcasts earlier as a fun way to learn. Do you have any favorite podcasts that you listen to in English?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorites is The English We Speak from the BBC. It's short and easy to listen to, and they teach useful phrases and expressions in every episode. Another one I love is All Airs English, which covers a lot of real life English, like how people actually speak in everyday conversations. It's perfect for learning idioms, slang, and cultural nuances.
Those sound like great resources. Podcasts are such a convenient way to learn on the go, and they help with listening comprehension too. Plus, they give you a chance to hear real, world language, which is so important for getting a feel for how native speakers actually communicate. I'll have to check out those recommendations. You've mentioned how important it is to keep learning fun. What do you think is the most important part of staying engaged and avoiding burnout during your language journey?
For me, it's about balance. It's easy to get caught up in the I need to study mindset and push yourself too hard, but that can lead to burnout. I try to find a balance between studying and having fun with the language. Like I said before, watching movies, listening to podcasts, and even chatting with friends in English helps keep me engaged without feeling like it's all work. It's about making learning part of your lifestyle, not just something you do at a desk.
I love that mindset. Making learning part of your daily life and blending it into activities you already enjoy is such an effective way to avoid burnout. It keeps you connected to the language without overwhelming you. It's all about finding that flow, right?
Exactly, the more you enjoy the process, the less it feels like a chore, and the easier it becomes to stay motivated. I try to remind myself that it's a lifelong journey, so there's no rush. The goal isn't to finish, it's to continue learning and growing over time.
I couldn't agree more. It's about enjoying the process, not just the end result. Language learning is all about growth, and every step you take brings you closer to your goal. That mindset makes the whole experience so much more rewarding. Jacob, I've really enjoyed this conversation today. Your tips have been so helpful, and I'm sure our listeners will find them valuable, too. Awesome. Let's keep going. Jacob, we've talked a lot about keeping the process fun and rewarding, but I know some people get frustrated with making mistakes. How do you approach making mistakes in your language learning journey?
Mistakes everyone's worst enemy when it comes to learning, but honestly, I think mistakes are one of the best ways to learn. If I don't make a mistake, I probably didn't push myself enough. I try to see them as opportunities to improve rather than failures. For example, when I say something wrong, I try to remember the correction and think about how I can use it the next time. It's all about being kind to yourself and understanding that mistakes are just part of the process.
I love that. Mistakes really are just stepping stones, aren't they? The key is to keep moving forward and not let them discourage you. I think it's also important to practice self-compassion. So many learners beat themselves up over small errors, but if you can treat yourself like a friend, it's easier to stay motivated.
Exactly, it's also important to be patient with yourself. When I first started learning English, I'd be really hard on myself, especially when I made simple mistakes. But over time, I've learned that progress isn't linear. Some days are great, and other days, you might feel like you're not improving as quickly. But that's okay, every step counts.
Absolutely. Language learning is a journey, and it's okay to have some ups and downs along the way. I think it's also helpful to remember that native speakers don't always speak perfectly either. Everyone makes mistakes, even in their own language. So, why should we expect perfection when we're learning something new?
That's such a good point. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to speak perfectly, but native speakers stumble over words too. It's more about communication and getting your point across than about speaking flawlessly. As long as the message is clear, that's what matters most.
Exactly. Communication is the goal. If you're understood, then you've succeeded. And I think that takes some of the pressure off learners. Language isn't about being perfect, it's about connection. It's about using the language to share your ideas, your thoughts, and your feelings.
Well said, Sophia. That's the beauty of language, right? It's a tool for connection. And the more we practice, the better we get at using it to connect with others. It's not about perfection, it's about being able to express ourselves and understand others.
That's such a refreshing way to look at it. And honestly, I think learners who focus on the connection, rather than the perfection, tend to enjoy the process a lot more. So, with all this talk about enjoying the process, what's something that's really helped you make learning English feel more enjoyable?
I think it's the variety of activities I do. Like I said earlier, mixing things up keeps me interested. Whether I'm watching a movie, reading a book, or chatting with someone in English, I try to make sure it's something I enjoy. I also like setting challenges for myself, like learning a new word every day or watching a movie in English without subtitles. Little challenges like that keep me motivated and make learning feel like a game rather than a task.
That's such a great approach, turning language learning into a game. Setting personal challenges makes it feel more rewarding and less like a chore. And I think it's awesome that you're always pushing yourself to try new things and step outside your comfort zone.
Thanks, I think if we're not challenging ourselves, we're not really growing. But at the same time, it's important to keep it fun. If you're not enjoying it, it's easy to get discouraged. So, finding that balance is key.
I couldn't agree more. When learning feels like a challenge, but it's still fun, you know you're on the right track. It's all about finding that sweet spot between challenging yourself and enjoying the process. And I think you've shared some amazing tips for staying motivated and having fun with language learning today. Great. Let's keep going, Jacob. I'm curious, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions about learning English, or any language, really?
That's a tough one. But I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that you need to be constantly studying or immersing yourself in the language for hours every day to make progress. Sure, immersion helps, but it doesn't mean you have to be glued to textbooks or apps all day long. In fact, sometimes taking a break and letting things sink in subconsciously can be just as effective. People often stress out because they think they need to practice nonstop, but that's not the case.
That's such an important point. It's easy to fall into the trap of feeling like we have to constantly practice to improve. But learning doesn't have to be all about intense focus and hours of study. It can be about small, consistent efforts. And it's amazing how much we learn just by exposing ourselves to the language in everyday situations, like listening to music, watching shows, or even talking to people.
Exactly. And sometimes learning happens outside the classroom or traditional study time. It could be when you're watching a YouTube video in English, reading your favorite article, or even chatting with a friend. Those moments add up, and over time, you start to see progress.
I love that. So, it's not about how much time you spend, but rather how you engage with the language, even in your free time. If you can make the language a natural part of your day-to-day life, that's when it truly starts to stick.
Definitely, it's like getting into a routine. At first, it might feel awkward or forced, but over time, it becomes second nature. Like when you learn new vocabulary, it's not just about memorizing words, it's about hearing them in context, understanding how they're used, and then naturally incorporating them into your conversations.
Absolutely. That's why I always say that language learning is more about habits than it is about hours of study. Once you start creating those habits, it doesn't feel like a heavy burden. It just becomes part of your daily life. So, Jacob, do you have any tips for someone who might be feeling a little overwhelmed with learning English?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, take a deep breath and don't try to do everything at once. It's easy to look at the whole process and feel overwhelmed, but if you break it down into manageable steps, it becomes a lot less intimidating. Set small, achievable goals. Maybe today you focus on learning 5 new words. Tomorrow, try watching a short video in English and picking up a few phrases. Little by little, those small steps will add up to big progress.
That's such great advice. Starting small and gradually building up really helps prevent burnout. Language learning isn't a sprint, it's more of a marathon. And as long as you stay consistent, you'll get there.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate the small victories along the way. Every time you learn a new word, get through a conversation, or understand something you didn't before, take a moment to appreciate that progress. It's all part of the journey.
Definitely. It's those small victories that keep you motivated and remind you how far you've come. And speaking of motivation, what keeps you motivated, Jacob? Is there a particular moment or accomplishment that reminds you why you keep learning?
Oh, absolutely. Every time I can have a conversation in English without feeling too self-conscious or making a lot of mistakes, it's a huge win for me. It shows that I've made progress and it feels so rewarding. And honestly, just remembering how far I've come from when I first started learning the language helps me keep going. It's easy to forget how much improvement has happened, but looking back gives me the motivation to keep pushing forward.
That's such a powerful reminder. When we're in the middle of the journey, it can be hard to see our progress. But looking back at where we started can be so encouraging. And it really puts into perspective how much we've learned. Great, let's keep going. So, Jacob, let's dive a little deeper. You mentioned earlier about the importance of small, consistent actions. Do you think that's something learners often overlook?
Yeah, I really do. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that you need to do something big, like attending a language class or completing a massive study session to make any progress. But in reality, it's the everyday moments that matter most. Like if you read a little bit in English each day or listen to a podcast during your commute, it all adds up. And eventually, it becomes a natural part of your routine. You just need to stick with it.
I couldn't agree more. It's those small daily actions that turn into real fluency. And I think that's something people often underestimate, how much time and effort goes into language learning, without them even realizing it.
Exactly, and also, there's something really powerful about consistency. It doesn't matter if you study for 10 minutes or an hour. What matters is that you're showing up. Over time, your brain starts to make connections, and you build a stronger foundation. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more comfortable you become with it.
That's a great point. The key is really just showing up. Even if it's just a few minutes each day, it keeps the momentum going. And I love how you mentioned that the brain makes connections. It's almost like building a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger your language skills get.
Right? And I think it's also important to embrace mistakes. Sometimes learners get discouraged when they make errors, but that's actually how you learn. Every mistake is an opportunity to grow and improve. So, rather than shying away from making mistakes, lean into them. They're part of the process.
Absolutely. Mistakes are a natural part of learning. They don't mean you're failing, they mean you're progressing. And, honestly, when you start to see mistakes as opportunities to improve, it takes the pressure off. You can relax and focus on learning, rather than being afraid of getting things wrong.
Exactly, and that's something I've learned over time. In the beginning, I was really nervous about making mistakes, but now I know that they're just part of the journey. Every time I make one, I'm one step closer to mastering the language.
I love that attitude. It's all about embracing the learning process. And, as you said earlier, it's about building that habit, showing up consistently, and enjoying the journey. So, Jacob, any final tips for anyone who's feeling a little stuck in their language learning?
If you're feeling stuck, I'd say take a step back and think about why you started learning in the first place. Remember your motivation and let that drive you forward. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, take a break. It's okay to step back for a bit and come back refreshed. Learning a language is a marathon, not a sprint. So pace yourself and enjoy the process.
Such great advice. Remember to be kind to yourself and allow yourself time to grow. It's all about progress, not perfection. And don't forget to celebrate the small wins along the way. Every step forward counts. Awesome. Let's keep it going, Jacob. You made a really important point about remembering your motivation. That's something a lot of people lose sight of when they hit a plateau in their learning journey. How do you think someone can reconnect with that initial spark, especially if they're feeling frustrated?
That's a tough one. When frustration sets in, it's easy to forget why you started. But one thing that helps is reflecting on your progress. Sometimes, when you're so deep into it, you can't see how far you've come. So, I'd suggest looking back at where you were when you first started. Maybe you couldn't understand basic phrases, and now you're able to hold a conversation. That can be really motivating. And also, thinking about the bigger picture, like how will speaking this language open up new opportunities for you in the future? It's all about keeping your eyes on the prize.
That's a great strategy. Reflecting on the progress you've made can really reignite your motivation. And looking at the bigger picture gives you that sense of purpose. We often get bogged down by the small obstacles, but remembering why you're doing it can help you push through those tough times. What do you think, Jacob, about setting smaller, achievable goals? How does that fit into the picture?
Smaller goals are key. They give you something concrete to work towards and a sense of accomplishment when you achieve them. I think that's especially important when you're feeling overwhelmed. For example, instead of saying, I want to be fluent in English, try setting smaller goals like, I'll learn 10 new words today, or I'll practice speaking for 5 minutes every day. These little wins will add up, and you'll start to see improvement faster. Plus, it's a lot less intimidating than thinking about fluency right off the bat.
Yes, that's so true. Breaking down the larger goal into smaller, bite-sized chunks makes it feel much more attainable. And those daily wins give you the confidence to keep going. One thing that people often overlook is how important it is to celebrate those small victories. Do you think that's something learners could benefit from more?
Absolutely. People tend to focus on the bigger picture and forget to appreciate the small wins along the way. But when you celebrate those little victories, it keeps you motivated. Maybe you had a successful conversation in English or learned a new phrase. Celebrate it. It's all part of the journey. If you only focus on the end goal, it's easy to lose sight of how much progress you've already made. So, whether it's treating yourself to something small or just taking a moment to recognize your growth, it's important to acknowledge your achievements.
I couldn't agree more. Celebrating those wins, no matter how small, is such a powerful way to stay motivated. It reminds you that you're making progress, and that's what counts. And, as you said, Jacob, recognizing that progress can help you stay grounded and focused on the journey instead of the destination.
Right? And if you're struggling to find ways to celebrate, it could be something as simple as giving yourself credit for sticking with it, or even sharing your progress with a friend or family member. Sometimes, just talking about your progress with someone else can feel like a mini celebration in itself, and that can help boost your confidence and keep you going.
I love that idea. Celebrating with others, especially those who support you, can really make a difference. It reinforces that you're not alone in this journey. And, like you said, sharing your progress can be a confidence booster. It's like creating a positive feedback loop, where every little step forward is recognized and celebrated.
Exactly. And, I think another way to stay motivated is by finding a language learning community. Whether it's online or in person, being part of a group that shares similar goals can be incredibly supportive. You can swap tips, share resources, and celebrate each other's successes. It can be a great way to stay accountable and motivated, knowing that there are other people on the same journey.
That's such an important point. Having a community can make all the difference, especially when things get tough. It creates a sense of camaraderie, and you can draw strength from each other. Plus, it's a great way to make new friends who share your passion for learning. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jacob. And a huge thank you to everyone listening. Remember, learning a language is a journey, and celebrating each small victory along the way is just as important as reaching the final goal. Stay motivated, keep practicing, and most importantly, enjoy the process. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.